Let me paint a picture. You've been investing emotionally, mentally, maybe even physically into someone who seems hesitant, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. They like you, they want you, but they never fully step into the relationship. You start to feel like you're auditioning for someone who can't decide if they even want to show. So you do something brave. You stop chasing. You stop texting first. You pull your energy back, not out of manipulation, but out of self-respect. Now here's where it gets interesting. Avoidants notice immediately when your energy shifts, not because they suddenly became emotionally enlightened, but because space for them is currency. When you pull back, it disrupts their emotional economy. Here's what happens next. They might reach out, but not with clarity. They'll dangle a breadcrumb, a vague message. Hey, been thinking about you. Not, I miss you and I'd like to see you. Just enough to see if you'll bite. If you don't, they might go quiet again. Not because they don't care, but because closeness terrifies them. They want connection, but they're wired to avoid vulnerability. When you're close, they retreat. When you pull away, they advance, just enough to restore their emotional control. So you might think, they must want me now. But here's the truth. Interest is not the same as commitment. Just because they miss your presence doesn't mean they're ready for your heart. That's why your job isn't to react every time they pop up. Your job is to watch what happens next. Do they follow through? Do they actually show up consistently? Or do they just flirt with the idea of being close while keeping the door half shut? You're not here to be someone's emotional experiment. You're not here to teach someone how to love you while they keep pulling away. So yes, when you pull your energy back, avoidance will notice. But that's not the real test. The real test is whether they step forward with clarity or just enough confusion to keep you stuck. Because someone who's ready for you doesn't need to feel your absence to recognize your value. They feel it when you're standing right in front of them, and they move towards you, not away. When you pull your energy back from an avoidant partner, it doesn't go unnoticed. In fact, it often triggers a strong internal reaction, though they may never admit it, and you likely won't see it on the surface right away. Avoidants are incredibly sensitive to changes in emotional dynamics. They may act aloof or indifferent when you're pouring your time and energy into them, but the moment that energy fades, the shift hits them like a cold gust of wind. That's because, even though they fear closeness, they've grown accustomed to your emotional presence. You've become a steady source of connection, safe, reliable, always there, and suddenly, when that disappears, it disrupts the balance they've been unconsciously relying on. To understand this fully, you have to look at how avoidants operate. They crave connection, but fear vulnerability. So they tend to maintain emotional distance even in intimate situations. They get close, then pull back. They open up slightly, then shut down. It's a push-pull dance that can be incredibly frustrating for someone who wants a secure, emotionally open relationship. But even in that pattern of withdrawal, they're always keeping an eye on the emotional climate. They need to know that you're still there, still emotionally available, even if they're not engaging fully. So when you stop over-functioning, when you stop initiating, checking in, or filling all the space, they notice. That space you've always filled suddenly becomes empty, and it makes them feel something they're not entirely comfortable with: uncertainty. For someone who keeps relationships at arm's length, control is everything. Your presence gave them that sense of control. You chasing over, giving, and trying to get them to open up allowed them to hold all the power. It was emotionally convenient for them. But now, you're not chasing, you're not fixing, you're not holding the emotional glue together, and the avoidant feels the gap. Even if they don't text or call right away, their nervous system registers it. They might become curious. They might start looking at your social media more, asking mutual friends about you, or even replaying old conversations in their head. It's not that they've suddenly become emotionally ready, it's that their comfort zone has been threatened. This isn't the same as missing you in a deep, emotionally aware sense. It's more of a response to the loss of emotional supply. Imagine they've been used to someone always holding the flashlight in a dark tunnel. Suddenly the light goes out. They don't run toward you in gratitude. They just don't know how to move forward in the dark. That's the feeling you've left them with. The silence becomes loud. Your absence creates a contrast they can't ignore. They start wondering, where did you go? Are you moving on? Did they lose something they didn't fully appreciate? These questions stir them, not always toward growth or action, but toward re-engagement on their terms. That's why it's so important not to mistake their discomfort with your distance for emotional readiness. They notice the change, yes, but how they respond to that change is where the truth lies. When you pull your energy back from an avoidant person, they often don't come rushing in with clarity and conviction. Instead, they tend to respond in a way that's ambiguous through breadcrumbs. These are small, vague gestures that seem like they mean something, but when you look closer, they offer no real depth, no commitment, and no clear intention. It might be a late night, "How have you been?" message, a random meme they send you with no context, a comment on your Instagram story, or even a like on an old post. To the unaware, these actions might feel like signs that the avoidant is finally coming around. But in reality, they are usually just emotional check-ins, not invitations to reconnect in a meaningful way. Avoidants are deeply uncomfortable with vulnerability, and that includes being direct about what they want. When you were the one putting in all the effort, texting first, showing up, keeping the emotional energy alive, they could stay passive and distant without ever fully losing access to you. But when that dynamic changes, when you go quiet or emotionally disengage, it shakes their sense of control. Rather than taking this moment to reflect and step up clearly, most avoidants will dip a toe back in the water. Just enough to see if you're still available, still waiting, still emotionally tethered to them. These breadcrumb behaviors aren't usually malicious. They're not necessarily trying to manipulate you in an overt way, but they are deeply rooted in emotional self-protection. If they reach out with a full, open heart and say, "I miss you. I want to see you. I've been thinking about how I've been showing up," they risk rejection, vulnerability, and being truly seen. That's terrifying for someone who lives in avoidance. So instead, they opt for the halfway gestures, the safe forms of contact that allow them to feel a sense of closeness without actually risking anything. And here's the trap: if you're emotionally invested, even a small breadcrumb can feel like hope. You might think they must care. They're reaching out. But if you respond eagerly, hoping it will open the door to something more, what you often find is that the door stays barely cracked open. They'll chat for a bit, be charming or warm, then fade out again. No plans to meet, no deeper conversation. No change in behavior, just a moment of contact that leaves you wondering if it meant anything at all. This cycle is confusing and emotionally exhausting. It keeps you in limbo, never really moving forward, but never completely letting go. And that's the effect of breadcrumbs. They create just enough emotional connection to keep you thinking something is happening, when in fact, nothing substantial has changed. It's a form of control. By offering occasional signs of attention, avoidants can manage your distance without actually having to step up or commit. What's even more important to recognize is that the breadcrumbing often increases in frequency or intensity when the avoidant senses you are genuinely pulling away, not just playing a game, but actually reclaiming your energy and moving on. That's when the "I miss you" text appears. That's when they suddenly watch all your stories. But again, watch the pattern, not the moment. Because a person who is truly interested doesn't breadcrumb, they build. They show consistency. They move things forward. They don't just toss crumbs to see if you'll follow. So when these small signals come your way, it's not the signal itself that matters, it's what follows. Does it lead to action? Does it evolve into something real? Or does it fall back into the same cycle of distance and uncertainty? Breadcrumbs aren't clarity, they're noise. And your attention deserves more than vague echoes of interest. It deserves action, effort, and honesty. Pulling your energy back from someone, especially an avoidant, is not about playing games or trying to manipulate them into wanting you. It's about choosing self-respect over self-sacrifice. Often, people confuse pulling back with being cold or punishing. But in reality, it's a shift from over-giving to re-centering. When you're constantly chasing someone who gives you crumbs, when you're always trying to earn closeness from someone who is emotionally unavailable, you begin to lose yourself. You start bending your needs, silencing your instincts, and stretching your emotional limits just to maintain the connection. That's not love. That's survival mode dressed up as devotion. Avoidants thrive in that imbalance. Not consciously, but structurally. As long as you're pouring energy in their direction, they don't have to face their own discomfort with intimacy. They don't have to do the hard work of showing up, of initiating, of being vulnerable. They just stay on the receiving end of your emotional labor while keeping their own emotional door mostly shut. You do the connecting, they do the distancing. That's how the dynamic often plays out. So when you stop showing up in the same way, when you stop over-functioning, stop chasing, stop proving, you're disrupting the entire system. This disruption isn't about punishment, it's about clarity. When you pull back, you're removing the emotional safety net that allowed them to coast. You're saying, in action, I will no longer overextend myself for someone who won't meet me halfway. And that message doesn't need to be spoken. It's felt, it's recognized. The shift in energy is powerful because for the first time, the avoidant has to feel the weight of their own passivity. They can no longer lean on your effort to maintain the connection. That's not manipulation. That's alignment. You're aligning your actions with your worth. There's a misconception that maintaining love or attraction requires constant pursuit, that if you step back, you'll lose them. But the truth is, anyone who disappears when you stop over, giving wasn't really there in the first place. They were leaning on your energy to hold the bond together. So by pulling back, you're not ruining something solid, you're exposing something unstable. Self-respect means allowing space for someone to step forward without pressure. And it also means being okay if they don't, because if someone can only connect with you when you're doing all the work, that's not a relationship. It's emotional dependency masters romance. Pulling back allows you to regain perspective. You begin to see not just what the other person is doing, but how much you are doing to compensate. You don't pull your energy back to make someone chase you. You do it to come back to yourself, to return to your boundaries, to stop begging for emotional crumbs from someone who's not willing or able to nourish a real connection. And in doing so, you give yourself the clearest possible view of who they really are, not based on words, but on effort. Not based on potential, but on presence. You create space for truth. And that space is where your self-respect finally gets to breathe. One of the most emotionally confusing experiences in a relationship with an avoidant partner is when they start showing signs of interest right after you've pulled your energy away. It can feel validating at first, like your absence finally made them realize how much you matter. They text you out of nowhere. They react to your posts. They might even compliment you or act as though they miss you. And because you've been starving for connection, those crumbs feel like a meal. But here's the critical distinction. Just because someone expresses interest doesn't mean they're ready for commitment. Interest can be driven by ego, loneliness, or even fear of losing access to you, not a desire for something real and lasting. Avoidants often miss the feeling of you being there more than the reality of being in a relationship with you. They don't necessarily miss the emotional intimacy or the closeness that comes with commitment. Instead, they miss the emotional support, attention, and warmth you provided. It's the comfort of your energy, not necessarily the readiness to meet your emotional needs, that draws them back in. This is where people get stuck. They think if they're reaching out, it must mean they've changed. But often, what's really happening is that the avoidant is reacting to the loss of control, not stepping into emotional maturity. Your pulling away disturbs the balance they were used to, the one where you chased and they retreated. Now that you're not feeding the dynamic, their ego feels the shift. They're no longer the one being pursued, and that change can provoke anxiety. But anxiety is not the same thing as love, and reacting to that anxiety is not the same thing as choosing commitment. Avoidants are often emotionally unavailable, not because they don't feel anything, but because closeness feels threatening to their sense of independence and emotional safety. So when they come forward with flirtation or vague signs of affection, it may simply be their way of establishing emotional contact without having to deal with the real vulnerability that intimacy demands. They might say they miss you, but avoid discussing the relationship itself. They may show affection, but avoid planning anything meaningful. They give just enough to keep you emotionally tethered, but never enough to build something lasting. That's why interest on its own is not a reliable sign of change. People who are genuinely ready for a relationship behave differently. They are consistent. They are clear. They don't rely on mystery, distance, or ambiguity to hold your attention. When they miss you, they tell you directly and follow it up with action. They want to repair the relationship, not just soothe their discomfort. But avoidance will often re-enter your life with passive curiosity. It's like tapping on a window to see if the light is still on. If you respond eagerly, they may feel a sense of relief, but that doesn't mean they're suddenly ready to give you what you've always needed. This is why it's important to measure someone's readiness not by how much they say they care, but by how much they're willing to consistently show up. Interest can spark a conversation, but commitment builds something real. And the space between the two is often filled with confusion, hope, and disappointment if you're not grounded in your own worth. You deserve more than someone who only shows up when you're leaving. You deserve someone who chooses you even when you're standing right in front of them, not just when your absence becomes inconvenient. When you pull your energy back from someone, especially an avoidant, what they do next is the only thing that truly matters. Words are easy. Promises are cheap. The real indicator of someone's emotional availability and relationship readiness is their behavior, consistent, intentional action over time. This is especially true when dealing with someone whose pattern has been emotional distance, unpredictability, or fear of intimacy. If you've stepped back and created space, it's not the initial reaction that tells you everything, it's what happens in the following days, weeks, and interactions that reveals their true capacity to show up. Avoidants may initially reach out. They may express missing you, feeling your absence, or even wanting to reconnect. And for someone who's been craving connection, these gestures can feel like a breakthrough. But what you need to observe is whether their actions match their words and whether that behavior is sustained. One nice message, one flirty interaction, or even one thoughtful conversation doesn't mean they've changed or that the relationship dynamic will suddenly improve. Consistency is the real test. A person who's serious about connection will follow through. If they say they want to see you, they'll make plans. If they say they've been thinking about things, they'll communicate what that means. They'll ask questions, listen, show vulnerability, and start doing things differently. They'll acknowledge their previous behavior without getting defensive or disappearing again when intimacy gets a little uncomfortable. That kind of change doesn't happen overnight. And it doesn't show up as a single grand gesture. It's proven through small, sustained effort. Avoidants, by contrast, often slip back into old patterns once they feel they've re-established a minimal connection. They may show initial interest just to check if the door is still open. Once they feel reassured that you're still emotionally available, they may retreat again, resuming the same avoidant behavior that left you feeling neglected or confused in the first place. That's why you can't make decisions based on temporary signals. You have to look for patterns. Do they continue to show up, or do they disappear the moment things start to feel close or emotionally vulnerable again? It's important to take your time when evaluating someone's intentions, especially after pulling back. Don't rush to reattach based on the first signs of contact. Let them show you over time whether they are willing to meet you at your level, not just emotionally, but consistently, reliably, and with presence. Real emotional safety is built through trust, and trust is built through action, not sentiment. When someone is ready to truly connect with you, they won't just react to your absence, they'll value your presence. They won't wait until you walk away to show interest, and they won't only move toward you when they're afraid of losing control. They'll be there even when things are calm, consistent, and emotionally steady. That's how you know it's real, not from how loudly they respond to distance, but from how quietly and reliably they respond to closeness. So when you pull your energy back from an avoidant, don't just listen to what they say, watch what they do. Anyone can miss you. Anyone can feel your absence and get triggered by it. But only someone who is emotionally ready will respond to that absence with clarity, consistency, and commitment. The rest, they'll offer breadcrumbs, flashes of interest, temporary attention. And if you're not careful, that little spark of recognition can pull you right back into a cycle that goes nowhere. You are not here to chase someone into emotional availability. You are not here to prove your worth through effort while someone else sits on the sidelines of your love. You are here to be met, fully, openly, and without games. And if someone can only value you once you've walked away, then what they valued was the feeling of comfort you gave them, not the relationship itself. So protect your energy. Trust your inner compass. Pulling back isn't rejection, it's redirection. You're not walking away to punish anyone. You're walking back to yourself, to your peace, to your power. And that is the kind of energy that attracts someone who doesn't just notice when you're gone, but shows up fully when you're there. Thank you for giving your time, attention, and heart to this message today. If this resonated with you, I hope it serves as a reminder of your value and your right to be loved without having to beg for it. Take care of yourself, trust what you feel, and never forget real love doesn't need distance to realize your worth. Thank you. And I'll see you next time.